All right, welcome to the show today, everybody. We're here with Rich Brooks, and no relation. Fortunately, you don't. The hair doesn't run in the family, right?
Yeah,
Uh, I'm
mine's
Mike.
going.
I'm Mike Brooks. I'm your host. Rich Brooks is again no relation, but Rich is up in Portland, Maine. Runs a company called Flight.com, where he does similar to what I do: internet marketing, web design, and runs the Agents of Change, which we're going to talk a bit about. So, Rich, I want to just turn it over to you. Welcome to the show. Well, thanks for coming on, and please, give a introduction. Talk about what you who you are, what you do, and I mean, I found you. I actually found you on Social Media Examiners. That's
Cool.
how I found you. And the focus today we're going to talk about on the show is community building. And because you've done a great job of that, and I would like to pick your brain on that for our audience so that they can take that and run with it. But do please fill in the blanks for me.
All right, sure. Well, first of all, just a little bit of clarification. So it's not flight.com, it's flight.biz. Somebody grabbed flight.com
Oh,
back in like
really?
1997, has not
Really?
changed the website since. I've reached out to him a number of times early on saying, like, oh, let me buy your domain. I'll get you up with a new website. I'll do this, that, and the other thing. I'll pay for it myself. Never showed any interest. The website is still there, hasn't changed a bit. So
Really?
I was flightnewmedia.com for a while. Flight New Media is the name of my web design and internet marketing company.
Gotcha. Sorry about
And
that.
then when the .bizes became available, yeah, no, don't worry about it. But when the .bizes came available, then I grabbed flight.biz just because it was easier. So
Gotcha.
my day job is president and chief rainmaker of Flight New Media, a web design and internet marketing company here in Portland, Maine, although we have clients all over the country. And then because I get bored easily, I've picked up all these side projects along the way, including, as you mentioned, the Agents of Change Digital Marketing Conference, which I know we're going to talk about. I'm also the tech guru on 207, which is the evening news program on the NBC affiliate up here.
Oh,
I teach a web marketing and social media class for entrepreneurs at the University of Southern Maine, Center for Continuing Ed, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So we can talk about a bunch of different things.
oh, very cool. Awesome. Well, I've got a list of questions down here. So, as I said, and again, thanks for coming on, and I
Oh, my
appreciate
pleasure.
having you here. And I know I was looking at the right stuff because it talked about you, so I must have gone to the right site. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, I just always, you always assume, but I guess that shows you shouldn't assume. So, Social Media Examiner, for those of you who are listening and watching this who don't know, it's a pretty big authority site in the social media field. So if you're into social media, you should be there. And I participate in that community actively. And you are in there's these clubs within social media. So you got a social media club, small business club, and I think it's Facebook, small business. And I can't remember off the top of my top,
Blogging.
blogging, right?
And then they just added a fourth one called water cooler, which is every
Oh,
topic that
cool.
doesn't fit in anywhere else,
Perfect.
and off-topic stuff too. So these are the, as you mentioned, the networking clubs that Social Media Examiner has available for free, where small businesses, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, big business can all go and just have conversations all about social media marketing.
Right, right. So you are in charge of you're the moderator, the head moderator for the Small Business Club. Now that's quite an honor.
Exactly.
Social Media Examiner is a very popular. It's one of the most popular, arguably the most popular sites or resources out there for social media today,
Mm.
and you are an expert on that in that forum. So how did you get to be in charge of the Small Business Networking Circle in Social Media Examiner?
Well, so a lot of my where do I begin? Social Media Examiner obviously has been around for a while. And I have been building my relationship with Social Media Examiner and with Michael Stelzner, who runs Social Media Examiner. He's the founder. And I've just gotten to know him over the years. And so this was just when he was ready to launch these clubs, and he decided that one of them he wanted to really focus on small business. I had already kind of established, at least in his mind, a certain amount of authority when it comes to social media and small business.
Right.
So maybe the right way to approach this is, how did I get involved with Social Media Examiner to begin with? And
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, it's Social Media Examiner is primarily a blog, comes out every single business day, and they have long, deep articles written by experts in the field. And it's got like, I want to say, forget the exact number, but it's well over 100,000 daily email subscribers. So it's apparently the #2 social media blog in the world behind Mashable.
Right.
And just to say, I had very little to do with their success, so I'm not trying to brag for them, but I am trying to establish it is kind of a big
You're a
deal to
big
get
part of it.
published there.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
you're a big part of that success. Absolutely.
Well, Mike has done a great job of leveraging a number of people who are skilled in certain areas, and I'm just one of many who have contributed to the success of this online website. So what happened is I actually met Mike at a dinner years ago at Blog World in Vegas, and I happened to sit next to him. I had already interviewed him. He was putting on these social media success summits at the time. I had never heard of him, and it was like $600 to take a virtual course.
Right.
But I happened to see somebody I knew on it, Denise Wakeman. And so I just reached out to her privately and I said, "What do you think about this? I mean, is this going to be any good?" And she's like, "Well, Mike only does top-notch events. So, yes, it's going to be very good. And yes, you should use my affiliate code." I'm like, "Okay." So I signed up for it, and it blew my mind. Like, just there was so much, he had like 24 experts all in social media, different subjects. And I got really interested in it. And so I started subscribing to Social Media Examiner. And then I saw that they had a call for writers, that they had their original cadre of superstars, A-listers writing for them, but they wanted to kind of expand this to more people. And so I threw my hat in the ring. And one of the things that I've always loved to do is write. I'm very passionate about writing. I love to write every day. And so I submitted a couple articles, ideas, and examples of my work, and I got picked up. And I could tell they were serious because I had to write an article. They had long list of regulations, what you could and couldn't do. It had to be a certain length, images, video, all this sort of stuff. And they pushed back on the first article. Like they said, "Okay, we need these changes." And nobody ever tells me that they need changes on my stuff. Usually it's like, "Oh, it's so wonderful." But they were kind of tough about it. I'm like, "Oh, wow, they take this seriously." So I get it published and they're like, "Okay, it's going to be June 2nd. I'm like, "All right, well, actually, I'm going to be in Aruba on my 10th anniversary. So do you think we could do it a different day?" And Irene's like, I'm sure we can do it another day." 5 minutes later, I get an email, "We cannot do it another day. You have to do it. We're going to launch that day, and you have to be available for comments the whole day."
Wow. On your honeymoon.
So
or
on my
anniversary.
anniversary, right? So I brought my iPad down to Aruba, and every couple hours when it was time to reapply the sunscreen, anyways, I'd run up to my room and check the comments. So it was all good. But I realized how serious they are, which is one of the reasons why they've been so successful. So I started writing for them about every month, every other month at the beginning. And then I saw Mike again at another Blog World in Vegas, and he had just put on his first non-social media success summit, these virtual events. This one was Facebook Success Summit. So I just said to him, "Mike, if you ever do a blogging success summit, I would love to be a part of it. I love to present." So I just went out. I was being assertive. And I guess really this is what it comes down to. It's like, yes, I had some skills, but the bottom line is I didn't wait for anybody to introduce me and say, "This is, Rich Brooks and he could do this." I went right up to Mike. I said hello and I said, "Mike, if you ever do a blogging success summit, I'd love to be a part of it." Turns out he was actually working on one right then. Now, I don't know if he had me in mind or not, but a few days later, I get an email from one of his assistants that said, "Mike would like to have you involved. Are you interested?" So that led to me doing a blogging success summit, and then a small biz success summit. And of course, my goal was always to do a social media success summit because that is kind of like the highest one they do. But when I looked through the list, everybody was described as author of,
Right.
author of. I've never written a book. But then Mike invited me onto one of the social media success summits, and it was great and certainly expanded my reach. And then Mike came back to me and said, I've got this secret project, which turned out to be the networking clubs. And he said, "Would you like to be a part of it?" And I said, "Yeah, I thought that'd be great. I've never really done a lot with community building. I've never been in that position. But I think it's interesting, and I think it'd be a great place to share and learn from other people. I'm in constant state of learning." And so that, Mike, is a very roundabout way of how I got to be leader of the Small Biz Club over in the Networking Clubs for Social Media Examiner.
Very interesting. And, one of the things I talk about a lot to my clients is getting out there and networking, and being in the community, meeting people, going to trade shows. And that's what you did. I mean, you didn't stay home and you didn't sit at your house waiting for things to happen. You went out and you made relationships. And I mean, that sounds like that's a big part of it. Am I correct? And
That is definitely part of it. I mean, and the funny thing is I'm not a networking guy by nature. Online, it's great.
Right.
Because you have all the time in the world to come up with that clever turn of phrase that makes you look like you're brilliant when you really spent 2 hours working on it.
Right.
But in person, it takes me a little bit longer to get going. When I know people, like we have local networking events and I do fine with them, but if I go to a brand new networking event, it's definitely a challenge for me. And it's
Right.
something that I have to work on and overcome. But I think it is important because as powerful as social media is, it's never as real world marketing or real world networking rather.
Right. And you went out and you found people though. I mean, obviously Michael Stelzner is an influencer. So did you do that? Did you target and say, not to target, but say, you know what, I want to get in front of these influencers in my field?
I think that's a great tactic. I never do that. I don't know. It just feels a little fake. But at the same time, I can't deny that I, like almost everybody else, has a certain interest in celebrity. And I don't mean celebrity like as in a Taylor Swift kind of celebrity. I mean like within my own realm. So like the Chris Brogans and the Mike Stelzners and the Mari Smith. So I can't help but notice these people when I go to these events. But I'm usually not the person who runs up and does like says, oh, I really like what you're doing. Can we talk sometime? It's just not in my personality.
Right.
But one thing that I have been doing lately, and I mentioned to you before the show, is I'm about to launch my own podcast. Now, years ago when podcasting started, I also started a podcast and I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying it again in part to do the same thing that you're doing right now, is interviewing people.
Right.
So I find that almost everybody has a story to tell or something they want to share, especially if they've got a book coming out or an event or something they want to promote. And that's a great opportunity to get in front of them and say, hey, I'd love to interview you for the show. And then especially if you're doing what we're doing with this Skype video, it's like, hey, we're face to face. I mean, we're talking. Like, if I see you at an event, I'm going to recognize you. We're going to immediately have a certain connection that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right.
So if you are uncomfortable, perhaps, going up to people you don't know, especially if you think that they're the next level up, like I am, that one opportunity would be is to interview them and just to get to know them like that and share their expertise with your audience. And I'll be honest, I wish I'd been doing the podcast all along because I love talking to people. It takes a lot of the pressure off of me. And then I can just talk to them and ask them questions and then sit back and let them share their expertise. And I'm doing them a service and I'm doing my listeners a service. And so everybody benefits from that.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And we got that in common. I did a podcast going back to 2009. I think I put my first podcast out, and boy, it was a pain in the neck back then. It's so much easier now with all the tools that are available to you. Still very similar. I mean, it's still same stupid process to get it on iTunes, but they're great. I love doing these and creating this video. This is a video and a podcast, so it is a dual purpose. But I actually just launched my new podcast yesterday. Actually, yesterday was the first day on iTunes. So,
oh, nice! Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. I'm committed to doing it, and I'm committed to taking it to 100 episodes and more. But that's my short-term goal is 100 episodes. And like you, same thing. I want to interview experts. So let's talk about that. Because another thing I've been, what I do, I teach as well. And I coach my clients to do these same things within their niche. So how do you go about getting people of influence? And that's my next question for you here is, you've got the Agents of Change conference that you're doing. You've got some A-listers coming, and Michael Stelzner makes sense to me now why he would be coming because you've got this relationship with him. You've got Chris Brogan coming. I mean, you've got some top dogs coming to your conference, and I'm sure that you're going to be able to interview those too. Now, and this is my own selfish question here for my own self-serving. How do I get people like Chris Brogan? How would I go about getting a Chris Brogan or a Michael Stelzner on my show? I'm not, them, you have the relationship with them. They have no idea who I am yet. Right. Yet until I break into their house or something,
Exactly. And then that's going to be weird.
Then it's going to be awkward. But how does somebody like me, and this is same question my audience would ask me is how do how do I get these people in my niche, in my industry, who are celebrities, who have authority in my niche to get in there? And you've got different levels. You've got people who are, the ABC listers, right? You got people who are just starting off. You got people who are, they've kind of got celebrity by association. And then you've got the top dogs in the niche. And you seem to be able to get those top folks into your into your shows, into your into your conference. So how do you do that? How does a schlub like me get the big top dogs on their show?
All right. Well, I guess let me answer that in two ways. First, I will tell you how I've done it in the past, which
Hmm.
may or may not work for you and your listeners. And then I will talk about how you could do it if you're starting from scratch. So,
Perfect.
my secret is tequila. I actually end up going to these networking events,
Right.
and I am somebody who I will sleep when I'm dead kind of mentality. So I
Right.
like going out and I like socializing at the parties. I'm more of a socializer than a networker. But very often I find myself at, in that last group of people, and it's some of the A-listers, and we've had a few drinks in us, and I start talking about the fact that I come from Maine, that I
Right.
live in Maine. I don't actually come from Maine.
Oop.
From away. And they're like, oh, I've always wanted to be in, Maine sounds so wonderful and all this sort of stuff. And then I say, well, I've got this conference that I'm putting on now in Maine. It's on a Friday. I'll fly you out. You come and speak, and I'll put you up for the weekend. And so that's actually how I've gotten some of these people. They've shown interest, and then I've got this selling point that is like, hey, I can put you in front of 400 people and all this other stuff, and it'd be a great way. Plus, you can bring somebody, spend a weekend. Maine is like vacation land for a reason. So people have this
Right.
fantasy about how wonderful it is. September's the best time of the year. So that's how I've done a lot of this. Literally, is just that sort of trick. Now, if you don't live in Maine, if you don't live in vacation land, obviously you've got to change that up a little bit. Some of the things are that no matter how big or high up somebody is in the social strata, first of all, you got to remember that they're still just people.
Right.
I mean, there's no difference between them and you, except they've had a little bit more success or luck than you have to this point in your life. Now, they may be, and they probably are, really busy, right? So you've
Sure.
got to take that into consideration. But there's a number of ways you can find out if, like, for example, I happen to know that Seth Godin, who I would think is a really big reach for me to get on my show right now. We
Yeah.
don't have any sort of connections.
Right.
That would be a reach for me. But I know that friends of mine who ran podcasts could never get him on a call. He wouldn't do interviews. He was just too busy, or just wasn't interested in it. And then suddenly he had a book coming out, and suddenly he was available for interviews.
Gotcha.
So one of the things you could do is see, does this person have something coming up? Is there a book launch? Is
Right.
there a conference? Is there something? And if you have a platform of your own, no matter how big or small, if it's small, you don't have to promise that it's a big, you can be transparent, but you don't have to be advertising. I've only got 2 listeners. It's my mom and my dad. But you just say, I've got a podcast, or I've got a blog, or I've got this. Anything you can do to kind of establish your expertise, get in 1 or 2 of these bigger name people, and then you can start to build on that.
Right.
So, last year was the first year of the Agents of Change conference. One of the reasons I got Chris Brogan was actually not because of tequila, but he actually grew up here in Maine. And so he comes
wow.
up quite a bit. And I gotten to know him by, I see him at conferences, and he's always been very friendly, very nice to me. He's a sweetheart of a guy. And so I was actually, after putting on another conference called Social Media FTW for 3 years, I'm like, I'm done with conferences. I will never put on another conference as long as I live. The very next day I ran into Chris Brogan, and he asked me how my conference went. And I'm like, oh my God, you knew I had a conference? And then he
Wow.
said he might want to get involved. So once he said that, I'm like, okay, I would do this again.
Must do a conference.
Right. And then, once I got Chris signed on, then I was able to talk to some other people and say, Chris Brogan is going to keynote. I'd love to have you involved too. So that also increased my social proof, because I've got these authorities who are speaking with me. So again, if you get one person, then you can get the next person, the next person. So you can say things like, hey, I saw you had a book coming out, or I know you've got a conference coming out. I do this podcast, or I do this blog, or I do this radio show. And in the past, we've had such people as A, B, and C on. I'd love to introduce you to my audience and let you talk about X.
Right.
So that's a nice little formula where you're not being, really manipulative. You're providing value for everybody, but you're also able to increase your own visibility by bringing in this, if not A-lister, B-lister. And then after the B-lister people, then you can go for the A-lister people.
Right. Awesome. Well, let me ask you this, and there are 2 questions that I've got here as a follow-up to that. First of all, there's 2 burning questions that I know my audience is going to ask, and I've been here. I've asked those same questions in the past, so I know the answers, but I want to get your take on this. Is number 1, does this get you business? It's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You do all this stuff. You get out there. Are you just talking into the air, into the putting stuff out there? Is it coming back around to you, or is it just because people look at it as like, oh, I'm just feeding my ego, or I'm just doing things that aren't going to get me. They want to know, is this getting me business? So let me ask you that question: does this work for your business? Does this get you business?
Well, the podcast, since it hasn't launched yet, I have no idea.
Right.
And to be honest,
And I'm
getting
talking,
business,
all this,
being
everything you
every,
do,
yeah.
being everywhere, going out and creating a brand in social media, building your, because really you're out on Social Media Examiner. That's work, that's effort, that's time
Oh yeah,
that
absolutely.
you could be out door to door selling your services.
Exactly.
Do all these actions, being out in social media, doing conferences, doing podcast, video interviews, whatever it is, do they equal business for you?
That's a great question. And I would say that they definitely equal business for me, but I don't necessarily know that I wouldn't have gotten more business if I had taken all the time I put towards that and instead just been doing cold calls. I have no idea. There's no way for me to absolutely
Right.
know it. I know for me personally that I do have a big ego I need to feed. And so part of it is I am completely energized by being in front of a big group of people. The more
Right.
people I can speak to at a time, the more energizing it is for me. And I know for some people, they get in front of a big group and they start throwing up in their mouth. So it's a
Right. Right.
completely different thing, right? So, but for me, it's a big deal. Like I enjoy that. And I enjoy writing and I enjoy like teaching. Like these are all things that I find very rewarding. So I've chosen this path to grow my business. Yes, it absolutely does help grow my business. Agents of Change is something that increases our online visibility as well as our visibility within the state. And through the TV show that I do where I go on for 5 minutes once a month and I talk about anything from it's usually not business stuff. I mean, it could be about coupon websites or map websites or the latest
Right.
apps on the mobile phone. It doesn't matter. But that establishes credibility in my local marketplace. So all those things do help. And I've definitely gotten business direct from a speaking gig. In fact, the local speaking gigs to a specific industry, not my own, have been most productive for me in terms of that. Like I'll go, I've got something coming up for the Maine Dentist Association of all things.
Hmm.
And actually last night I cracked my tooth eating a chicken bone or a chicken drumstick. Had to go into the dentist this morning for an emergency, a filling.
Oh
And the
wow.
guy's like, "Oh, so I see you're speaking to our organization next month."
It's a
So
great
I mean, it's like
icebreaker.
it's yeah, it's kind of funny that all these things happen. So those kind of speaking events definitely make an impact for me and my business. But some of the stuff that we talk about, or some of the stuff, is really just it's more about networking and bringing more people in so we can have more connections. But a lot of the types of presentations I do are not necessarily about building flights pipeline or
Hmm.
filling its pipeline. It's more just about I enjoy presenting, and also I'd like business of getting paid for speaking. I mean, that's one of the things that I
Right.
enjoy doing, and I enjoy when people pay me to do it. So,
Sure. Sure. It's a huge credibility thing too. If somebody sees you and they see you in all these forums, they see what you're doing. There's no way they can't say expert, leader.
right.
It's credibility.
Especially if you're associated with people who are bigger deals than you are. There's no
Right.
two ways about it. And it's funny, sometimes it is just hearing the same person's name over and over again in a short period of time. There's a band that's been around for years called Daft Punk, and they just came out with a new album. And I only know of this band, like never having heard of them, but I listened to another band that has a song about Daft Punk, so it kind of stuck in my head. All of a sudden, I start seeing Daft Punk, Daft Punk, Daft Punk.
Right.
And then by the sixth time I saw it in the New York or New York Times, I'm finally like, all right, I got to figure this out.
Gotta see
So
it.
I
Yeah.
went and I listened to it on Spotify and all this sort of stuff. I think it happens with a lot of us. Like all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you start hearing all these things happen at the same time. You're like, I have to check this out.
Yep.
So definitely credibility is a big thing, repetition is a big thing. But yeah, if you're willing to put in the time, but again, it all depends on what your business is. And it depends, if your business is installing plumbing, I don't know that this is going to be the right process for you. I'd probably invest more of my money in local SEO and maybe, like sponsoring a road race or something.
Right.
This isn't what I would do unless you
Sure.
love also public speaking.
Right.
So this is a channel, but it is by no means the only channel for businesses to be able to grow and generate more leads.
Right. All right. So the second question is in competition. So look at me and you. We do virtually similar stuff in our companies. You know, my company's an internet marketing web design company. Your company's does the same thing. So I'm sure we have overlap in a lot of ways, if not all the ways. We're competitors. But we're also I'm also bringing you into my audience.
Absolutely.
Now you do the same thing. How do you look at that? A lot of people say, well, why would I want to take on a competitor? Why would I want to be with bring a competitor to my audience? And talk about that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. Um, when it comes to me and you, there's so much business out there for the services that we offer.
Right,
I don't even really worry about it. Um, I figure that I can learn from you, you can learn from me.
right,
And we may have overlapping services. We might also have complementary services. I mean,
exactly. Yep,
obviously, we're talking about agents of change, which
right,
a lot of your audience might want to check out, whether they do the online version or whether they do the in-person version. So I'm benefiting that way.
right,
I'm being introduced to your audience. There may be people in your audience who like what I have to say better. Or when I promote this show to my network, they may come in and say, I really like the questions Mike asks. I'm going to check out more of his stuff. So by default, even though we're growing our audiences, we're also being put in front of people who are going to be more in tune with our message.
right,
There are going to be businesses out there and people out there who are going to do better working with you than they are with me and vice versa. And part of the beauty of the internet is that if you are your true self on the internet, you will attract the best type of customers to you.
right,
So that's also a big benefit of getting out there. And I'm not worried about you. Not like I'm worried that you'll take business away or vice versa,
right,
but it's like there's just enough business. But
yeah,
even in my own town, I see a lot more competition than I did 5 or 6 years ago. And these people are friends of mine. But we bump into each other in the waiting room of some places, which is always a little awkward.
awkward, right,
But then we make plans for lunch.
right,
So I would rather see everybody in my industry, especially locally, work together to kind of raise the bar to be as awesome as
exactly,
possible and grow these customers' businesses with them than to have this competitive sniping thing going on, which
right.
is kind of like a zero-sum game.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and it's our business is online, but I say this is also transferable local business. Same rule. Not that you want to promote your competition, but there's so much business. Rising tide lifts all boats.
It is
You know,
true.
it's
Absolutely. And the bottom line is, there's a social media breakfast here in Portland, Maine. Portland, Maine, for those of you who don't know, is really just a big town more than, the capital of Maine. Actually, it's not the
right.
capital of Maine. Augusta is. But, I run
Did not
into
know
my
that.
customers and clients and vendors and competitors almost every day when I walk out to lunch. The
Mhm.
old port is really the hub right here. And I see everybody. And the bottom line is you've got to treat other people well. But social media breakfast is put on once a month here in Maine. It's well attended. And so it's put on by one group, but their direct competitors often sponsor it.
Right.
Now they must realize that there's obviously that you could choose either to go with the person who's putting it on or the person who's paying for it, but they both get visibility and then you get a choice. And they're working
Right.
together to be able to put this event on.
Right. 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 Awesome. Yeah. And thanks. I know I went off script a little bit here. Not that we're on script, but you know, let's see. How
I'm
did
just
you?
reading what you told me to write.
Yeah, exactly. For the audience, just so I always make my whoever I'm interviewing, I always make them aware of the kind of questions that I'm going to ask. And some people, everybody's different with speaking, so I like to prepare my guests so that they know kind of what I'm going to ask. And I just went completely in a different direction. So thank you for being such a good public speaker. I
This
mean,
is
you're
just a
excellent.
conversation. We're having a
Yeah.
good conversation.
It's amazing though how many people. I mean, you're a really good public speaker. You're a great public speaker, and you're really
Thank
good
you.
at it. You're polished, and some people, like you said before, they just want to vomit when
Right.
the thought of idea of doing what we're doing, even just speaking. I love doing all this. I love getting up on stage. I'm the same as you.
Right.
I have my ego to feed as well as my business, but. I love teaching. I really like to teach. I owned a martial arts school before I did this, and
Oh, cool.
I've been teaching since I was 18 years old. And love doing it. So, but the idea of doing this to some people is just sickening to them.
Right.
So,
Well, and then they need to find a different path.
right, Yeah,
There's
there's
not
always a different
one
way.
way to succeed.
Exactly.
If you've got information to share, maybe you could, and you don't like to be in front of people, maybe you choose webinars.
Right.
Webinars are basically the same thing, but you don't have to worry about how many people are watching you.
Exactly.
Or you could do a podcast, which is all audio, or you could write blog posts.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different things that you can do to get new business that don't necessarily require you to be in front of a stage of people.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So you got on TV in Maine. I'm interested to know how you did that because I would love to, and this is like, again, when this show is all about what I would recommend doing for my clients. So I try and bring whatever I'm talking, whenever I'm on, I bring a guest in. It's always to educate my clients, and I don't bring anything on here that I wouldn't recommend to a client of mine. But I'm my own client too, so these are some
Right.
selfish questions. I'd love to
Good.
be a guest on, like a on TV in Connecticut here, and I'm sure some of my clients would love. I know a bunch of my clients would love to do that. How did you do it? How do you recommend somebody like us do it?
This is a part of the interview where I have to admit that really I have no clue how I do any of the things that I do. I mean, so much of my life is pure luck. I honestly believe that. But I also believe in Edna from The Incredibles, who said, "Luck favors the prepared."
Luck, yeah,
Um,
I love that
so,
movie.
yeah.
I got
So
a 12-year-old, so I watched that movie maybe 500 times.
it's brilliant. It's my favorite Pixar flick, but it's how the Fantastic Four movie should have been made. But that's a whole nother
Exactly.
story. Um, so for me, it was just luck. I was doing a few presentations. This was before I really started doing a lot. And the Maine PR Council had me speak next, along with two other people. And one of the women happened to be on the 207 program. 207, by the way, Maine is one of two states with only one area code. And
Oh, really?
207 is that area code. And so
Huh.
that's kind of, that's why the show is called 207. So
Wow.
she was the style guru. She would come in on a regular basis and talk about new fashion stuff. And they asked her, they're like, "Do you know anybody who does tech or mark?" I think it was mostly tech. And she had just spoken with me side by side. So she said, "Well, you should talk to Rich." So I went in there, and I had already actually been interviewed by this particular station a couple times. I don't know if that weighed into it or not, but it just kind of worked out. So that's kind of how I did it. So it came naturally. And this is what I truly believe is like one of these things builds on another, builds on another.
Right.
That's how I've done it. But if you were like, you didn't have a lot of expertise or a lot of establishment, it is a little bit more tricky. Derek Halpern of Social Triggers talks about the drafting technique. So this is one thing that you can do to increase your chances, where it's like if you see a reporter writing on a certain subject, especially if they've interviewed your competitor,
Hmm.
you could send them additional follow-up information to kind of establish yourself as a resource and somehow plug it that you could talk about this if they ever wanted to do a follow-up story.
Smart. That's
So
smart.
that's a drafting technique, and it is very clever and it's very effective. I've actually never used it, but I've heard it because I already had established myself on TV. But the thing that, first of all, the other caveat I have to throw out is I live in Maine. Okay,
Right.
it's a smaller pond. It was easier for me to succeed. If I was still living down in Boston, I doubt I would have ever been on TV.
Sure. Sure.
I can't say that for sure, but it's possible. I
Yeah.
mean, who knows? Maybe I would have had different opportunities in Boston. But the bottom line is, you can certainly reach out to reporters. If there are reporters who are regularly writing on your industry, send them some stuff. And don't be sending them some stuff solely to get on TV. Send them some stuff to establish your credibility and
Right.
expertise.
And help them.
Yeah, I got twice quoted in Inc. magazine because of blog posts I had written. I
Hmm.
wrote them on subjects, they Googled them, I was one of the top results, and then all of a sudden I became the expert. And that
Right.
happened with me on CNN too. So it's happened, and that was CNN.com. It was a long article they wrote, not the TV. But the bottom line is,
Sure.
if you've built up your platform, you start to attract journalists. Journalists, they're screwed these days. I mean, they don't have the resources they had 10, 15 years ago. They've
Right.
got Google. So if you
Right.
have your own platform, and Google knows this, and Google wants to refer journalists over to you, you will start to get more of these calls. And then
Hmm.
you may not get that regular gig like the kind I have, but you will get quoted in the paper, and that's or online or through TV. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Right. Very
I mean, there's a
interesting.
lot of tricks. You can, bottom line is, find your local journalists, put them in a Twitter list that you create yourself, and just start answering their questions. Increase your
Right.
visibility in front of them. Become that expert. and then they'll keep turning to you.
Right. That's great advice. That's
Oh, wait, I got one more thing.
yeah. No, go ahead.
Harrow, help a reporter out.
Right. Yep. I haven't
So,
done that
help a
one in a long
reporter
time.
out was something I actually have somebody in my office. It comes out 3 times a day, and it's basically primarily for reporters, but also different types of authors use it. And if they're looking to write a story, they use Help a Reporter Out, and that pushes it out to everybody who's subscribed. And the list is
Right.
huge. I forget how many people are on it.
Oh, it's
So,
it's big.
yeah. So 3 times a day you get this. And so for the Agents of Change, one of the women in my office happened to see that they were looking for somebody who ran small conferences for or lesser known conferences for small business.
Right.
I responded. It turned out it was Forbes magazine, or
Wow.
Forbes, it wasn't the magazine. And they wrote an article after interviewing me called Four Lesser Known Conferences That You Should Consider in 2013. And out of the four, Agents of Change was one of them. And
That's
so I
awesome.
responded there. And of course, now that Forbes has endorsed this more or less,
Right.
that's something I use in all my promotional material,
Oh,
which
yeah.
of course, just like having Chris Brogan speak, just takes your credibility and your authority to another level.
Yeah. And it created, essentially, you nailed it. You really nailed it when you first started. You said you blog every day, you write every day. You're creating content. I mean, you can't do this unless you're generating good
Yes.
quality things. You have that hub that people find, and you're certain, it's helping your SEO. Of course, I'm sure you do SEO for yourself, and
Absolutely.
so that's where it really probably starts. I mean, that's what I tell people. It's like it starts with creating great content, and I should say it's Haro HARO.com for those of you who've never heard of that. It's a great resource. I haven't used that in a long time. I'll have to jump on there again.
If you, it's time consuming.
Yeah.
It's something where if you have somebody in your office or you work with a VA, virtual assistant, you give it to them.
Right. Yeah. It's you can get lost in that. So, what's your social media channel of choice? Do you have one that you like over another? Like, are you a Facebook person? Are you a Twitter person?
I am a Twitter person. I always thought that Twitter personally and professionally, it's my favorite platform. There are other platforms that drive more traffic to our website. We use Facebook quite a bit, and I use it personally as well. But to be honest, I've just never enjoyed the conversations anywhere else as much as I enjoy them on Twitter. I just find that the most interesting people who often hate Facebook are on Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to share links, and it's a tool that I think is underutilized by a lot of people.
That's awesome.
But
Yeah.
I use them all just because I need to stay on top of them, just for my business. Like I probably would not have a Pinterest account or three, as the
Right.
case may be, if I wasn't in this industry.
Gotcha. Now, give us a Twitter tip. What's your top Twitter tip?
I think lists are the most underutilized, which I know I already mentioned, but creating Twitter lists, it really separates the noise from the signal when it comes to Twitter. So I've created, I actually have so many lists, but I've kind of used 7 or 8 of them on a regular basis. One I call influencers. So these are all the people who always have the best information to share, or the people in my industry who I should be paying attention to.
Right.
So that's one of the lists. And I use TweetDeck. Unfortunately, I had to upgrade to the newest one because the old one stopped working. But so I've got these are all in columns. It almost, if you don't know Twitter, it almost looks like a scene out of the Matrix with all this information flowing down.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So I've got one for influencers. I've got one for cool tweeps, which are usually the most inappropriate people on Twitter that I love to follow and engage with. Because there's so few people in Maine, I try and track all of them. I've got 3 lists: Mainers, Mainers 2, and Mainers 3, and they're almost all full up. So I'm going to have to start a 4th one soon. And so those are the kind of lists. And then if I go to an event or preparing for an event, I also use those as well. But for example, we mentioned earlier, use it if you're trying to get in front of journalists. Create a list of either local or industry-specific journalists that you want to follow.
Right.
If you run a restaurant or anything that's geographically challenged, start following local people, especially ones who might be talking about food all the time, or food bloggers, whoever you want to be in front of and influencing and engaging with. Create a Twitter list around those people so that you're more likely to see their tweets. Because otherwise, I follow like 4,400 people, but of course, I only see maybe 100 or 200 out of that entire list because I've created these valuable lists. And sure, I might lose a couple of great tweets, but generally I'm getting much more value out of Twitter because I'm creating these lists.
Right. Great advice. All right, so let's talk about Agents of Change now, and talked about this in the beginning that I've got a free pass that you've graciously given
Free
us to
digital
give
pass,
out
right?
to
Absolutely.
free digital pass. We should. There's two ways you can go to Agents of Change. You can go to Maine, but you're doing it digitally. So I don't think we got into that. So explain what Agents of Change is and what you're going to do, how
Sure.
and how people can go.
Excellent. Well, this is the second year of the Agents of Change Digital Marketing Conference. It's all about search, social, and mobile marketing, which I consider to be the three agents of change right now.
Right.
I really believe that if you can master these three channels, you can rule the world. You can take over from any of your competitors, no
Yeah.
matter how big they are.
Yep.
And so, what I like to do is bring in a bunch of people at the top of their game, whether they're well known or not, to talk about some of these different aspects. It's a 1 day conference. It's purely educational. There's no pitching or pushing a product or anything like that. So, if you're going to come, you're going to come to learn.
Right.
I would love people to come to Maine, whether they're from Maine or from away. We've got 400 seats. We've already sold over a quarter of them, almost well, about 150 seats are already gone. So
Wow.
the physical passes are going quickly. And if you want to come up and you want to write off a trip to Maine as a business expense, this is your opportunity. September 20th is the best time. September is the best time of year to come up.
Yeah.
Conference is on the 20th on a Friday. Spend the weekend. But I also know expenses are tough. Travel is tough. So we've worked with the Pulse Network out of Massachusetts, and we've created a digital pass. Now, I've gone to conferences and I bought the virtual pass before, and it's helpful. Usually you get the audio and some slides. Maybe it's the slides into a movie kind of thing, but it's not like you're there.
Right.
This is different. This is a whole nother level of virtual accessibility. The Pulse Network comes down, and almost the entire day is in one auditorium, although we do have a few breakout sessions. Everything that happens in that auditorium, we've got a 2-camera crew, so back and forth, plus the feed from the slides as well. So you really get a feeling that you're there. And
Right.
if you're watching the live feed, we are for any speaker who wants to have Q&A, we'll be taking Q&A from people on Twitter. So you can literally
Cool.
be sitting
That's very
there
cool.
and ask questions and be part of this conference live. And if you can make it live, because we get people from Australia and New Zealand and India checking in, and if you don't want to stay up all night, we're going to have everything, including the breakout sessions, on demand for a year after the conference is over. It's like 14, 16 hours of content. The digital pass is going to be $149 ultimately, but right now during the early bird, which goes through July, $49.
Nice.
So crazy good deal. It's like all the, Chris Brogan, Mike Stelzner, Laura Fitton from HubSpot, James Wedmore, who's like the YouTube master.
Yeah.
I've got John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire.
Wow.
He's got one of the most popular podcasts out there when it comes
Yeah.
to business. I'm sure I'm blanking on a few. I've got this guy, Roderick Russell, who the first time I met him swallowed a 26-inch sword in front of me. It was the least interesting thing he did all night. And he is going to also be presenting there as
Wow.
well. So it's going to be a great, mind-blowing conference. It's going to be a lot of fun, whether you can physically make it. I'd love you to come up. But if not, we've got some great deals. Early bird special for the physical pass, $49 for the digital pass. And I know, Mike, that you're going to be giving out one to your audience as well.
Yes, and I appreciate you giving me that. I'm going to be there personally. I'm going to make a point to come. My
Awesome.
goal for 2013 and into 2014 is to get to as many blogging, social media conferences as possible. I missed Social Media Examiner's event in April, which I'm kicking myself for not going because I heard it was
There'll be another
amazing.
one. It was a big success.
Yeah, I'm going to be getting around the country and meeting folks. So I'm going to look forward to coming up to Maine. I go to Acadia. I camp up at Acadia
Oh, it's beautiful up
sometimes,
there.
and I got to tell you, man, I'm down in southern Connecticut, and it is like you feel like you're driving to the moon to get from one end of Maine to the other. That
Yeah.
is a big state, man.
Oh, yeah. Some of the northern areas, the towns don't even have names. They have numbers because
Right.
really they're just owned by the lumber companies. So it's just like, oh, I'm going up to T4972 today, But I live in southern Maine, which really to me feels more like a suburb of Boston. I grew up
Right.
in Needham, Mass. And it doesn't have that much of a different feel, except the houses are a little more affordable.
Right. Yeah, it's beautiful up there. Maine's gorgeous. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be there September 20th and hanging out with you in person.
Awesome.
And hey, thanks for coming on the show. I hope
Thanks for
you'll.
introducing me to your audience. I hope they
Yeah,
got something out of this today.
oh, they did. I got tons of notes here, so we'll
Cool.
put all sorts of stuff in the show notes, and this will be on iTunes and yeah. So thanks for coming and do me. I hope you'll come back and be on the show again. So
Anytime you ask.
all right, man. Thanks. Have a great
All right.
day.
Take care.